Here we are again with another Hermle clock. This is my latest edition. This is a Hamilton Wheatland. It is a bracket mantle clock with a Hermle movement in it, rebadged by Hamilton. I did a clock trade with a new friend named Nicholas. So thanks, Nicholas, for the trade. I traded him my Bulova ATO-MAT for this Hamilton Wheatland that needed some work. You can see the case and the finish is in outstanding condition. Very, very nice. It's also got the handle. And it has the original key too. Nicholas found this at a Goodwill for $40. Has some very nice brass decorative features on the door, and the case features extremely solid, sturdy, heavy-duty wood. This is extremely solid, extremely heavy. There's the Hamilton logo. Let me open it up. You can see that, surprisingly, there's no area on the dial that tells you where the clock was made. Also, these spandrels, it seems like they were pressed into the dial once the dial was finished being manufactured. It's not a separate attachment that was glued on. I think it was pressed in with the actual sheet of metal, because look at how thin it is. I will let you hear what this sounds like now. It's a very quiet chime. Here's 1 o'clock. Oop. One of the chime hammers could do with a tiny adjustment. Here's the inside. As I stated, it is a Hermle movement. The Westminster chime variant, the popular 340-020. This movement was made in 1985, and I got it with the balance wheel oscillation being extremely small. Now, all it needed was some oil, because, as you can see, it's running away much, much nicer. Nicholas can confirm that it is running much, much nicer than before. I still don't think that's exactly an optimal oscillation in comparison to the oscillation on this one, which is a 1973 Hermle 1050-020. It looks like this one is swinging a bit wider than this one. Actually, it might be roughly the same. This floating balance escapement is genuinely a floating balance. A lot of the new Hermles don't use a floating balance per se. They basically just use an upscaled watch escapement. The setup is much different. This spring is different, and it doesn't actually make the balance wheel float. As you can see, it is floating here. While on a 2005 Hermle 340-020, the balance wheel here, as you can see, it's a different construction. It's not floating. The hairspring is actually a more conventional one right here, and you adjust it with this screw. Rather than adjusting the speed with this little arm right here, these multiple different little arms. This clock does come with a silencer. There's the silencer arm peeking out of the face. And there's also this silencer bar, which you can put down if for some reason this one stops working. I think this one's more for shipping though. Let me chime it for you from the back so you can see the hammer's working. When I got this clock, it had a bit of an issue with the hammers being a bit too stiff. That seems to be a common problem with Hermle movements from this time period. So the hammers have to be treated with care. I had to douse them in oil in an attempt to free them up. They're much freer than they were before, and Nicholas can also confirm this. The chime hammers wouldn't even descend onto the chime rods properly. It would go way too slow like this. While I'm not a huge fan of Hermle movements because they are just so common and found literally everywhere, basically the courts of mechanical clocks, I just have to appreciate this clock for its solid, sturdy construction. Also something worth noting, the owner of our local clock shop, which is where me and Nicholas met up to trade, said that this would have needed a lot of work to get functioning properly, but it only took me about an hour and a half to get this thing functioning very nicely. And it only needed to have some oil. But I also have to see if it's going to keep time or not, because these floating balances are quite picky. Sometimes they just don't keep time anymore, and you need to find a new floating balance. If this one's floating balance happens to be bad, I'm not going to look for an old floating balance like this one. Instead, I'm going to replace it with a new floating balance, like the one that you saw on the other Hermle movement I have shown in this video. So now, I'm going to let you see the movement from the front. Here's the front of a Hermle 340-020. I feel like this is a very good movement for explaining how a Westminster chime clock works. There is a star wheel here. You can barely see it. It's just behind this gear that's behind the snail, and it lifts this piece right here, which then in turn lifts another piece as such, and then it releases the chiming mechanism, but I have the chime hammers blocked, so it's not going to go. So this is Hermle's self-correction mechanism right here. This hook will be hooked on, because there's a cam here, on this snail, I guess you could say, or this count wheel, that will block the chime mechanism from chiming until it is lifted high enough that it activates. I actually have a separate video showing it better. I'll link it here. It's in a card, so you can see it. It's a Hermle 341-020 in that video, but it is it's basically the same thing. The only difference is this clock uses a balance wheel rather than a pendulum. So, how the clock counts the hour, this is called a rack and snail striking mechanism. This piece right here is called the snail, and this piece right here is called the rack. When the clock reaches the hour, which in this case would be this part of the cam right here, the cam causes this whole assembly to lift up as such, to the point where it activates this side of the movement, and it drops the rack. And then the rack will count the hour. If I just lift this up, you can see how the rack counts as soon as it's done chiming. See? And then once it reaches the very end, it stops. Here's the back of the Hermle movement from the Hamilton clock. It is badged Hamilton, but it is a Hermle, made in 1985, model 340-020. So, thank you, Nicholas, for the amazing opportunity. It was a pleasure to meet you, and I'm glad to call you my friend. You're awesome, you're cool, you're sick as heck. I hope you enjoy my Bulova as much as I'm enjoying your Hamilton. So nice on this very lovely table. This is where the other Hamilton is now. Yeah, not ideal, but you know, I'm running out of room. So yeah, thanks for watching. That's it now. I will catch you later.